you know of someone who ruined their life in just a matter of minutes? If so, how did they do it? Story 1. Excluding accidents and fights. Guy got intoxicated at corporate holiday party and made out at party consensual with work wife who was a one-rank subordinate. HR unimpressed with violation of zero tolerance policy. Fired for cause. Actual wife unimpressed with excuses. Filed for divorce. Story 2. She sold pills that she knew contained fentanyl to two people. The first one died, she found out, sold the same pills to another person. That person died, boom, life in prison. The texts between her dealer are what led to her arrest and exposed that she had full and complete knowledge that the pills would result in an overdose. Story 3. When I was in my early 20s, I worked as an energy worker in field service. One of my really close friends was someone who I was on calls with regularly. A project lead pressured both of us to work on equipment we weren't qualified or trained to work on, and we unfortunately relented. We were halfway done with the task and I walked out to the truck to grab water bottles. Halfway to the truck I hear a giant buzz, then a huge bang, then screaming. By the time I get back to the generator room, he's fully on fire. The cabinet had arc blasted and he had been right in the way. By the time I got our fire blanket from the truck, he was basically fully engulfed. I was able to put him out and get him into as much of a recovery position as I could, and then I called our shop to get them to organize rescue to our location. He somehow survived 80 to 92nd and 3rd degree burns, but coded so many times he ended up with severe brain damage from oxygen deprivation. He lost his eyes, his sense of smell and taste, and much of his sense of touch. I think he lost his hearing too from the noise of it too. He's in a vegetative state in a full-time care facility now. I had frequent nightmares for years about it. The thing that stuck with me the most was since the arc blast had hit him basically right in the face. It basically boiled his skin off. I ran in and saw him ripping large pieces of his face off while he tried to bat the flames off. The smell and sight of that never goes away. Story 4. An ex-girlfriend of mine, lovely person, was out at a restaurant bar with a friend one night. They had a meal and played pool. When they left, for some reason she drove his car. I don't know why, but I know that when she and I were together she asked to drive my car just for the experience of driving a different car. Maybe that was it. And I imagine, driving in someone else's car, you take a few extra seconds to adjust the seat and the mirrors and get your bearings. Unbeknownst to her, a teenager was driving a Mustang nearby. He was pissed because someone passed him a mile earlier, and his ego was hurt. He decided to catch up to the guy and floor the Mustang, getting up to speeds in excess of 100 miles per hour. As my ex pulled out of the parking lot to cross the median, she had no way of seeing the Mustang barreling toward her over a hill. He crashed into her, killing her and her passenger. 2 seconds earlier or later and they would not have made contact. I went to his trial. I remember her poor mother sitting there stone-faced while testimony was given. Several lives were ruined in that moment. My ex was only 26, she never got married, never had kids, never found her way in life. Story 5. He was excited to see a band. He decided to slide down the escalator wall between the up and down as he went to Subway, tripped, fell 2 stories-ish, and that was the end. Story 6. When I was a teenager, my dad and this dude had beef with each other. My dad was dating this guy's ex-wife, and he didn't like that. They bumped into each other at a bar and exchanged some words. My dad left the bar, and the dude was waiting for him outside. A car rolled up, and somebody handed the dude a handgun. He pointed at his head from about 2 feet away and pulled the trigger. Luckily for my father, the gun jammed. My pops wasn't taking any chances, so he took off running. The dude cleared the gun and emptied the clip, missing all but one shot that hit my dad in the back. My dad was already downtown and the hospital was only a couple blocks away. Or so he thought. Unluckily for my padre, the hospital was under renovation and preparing for relocation. When he saw that it was under construction, he slumped over and called 911 for an ambulance. The surgeons removed his kidney because it was too damaged to repair, and survived. The dude got an attempted murder charge and almost 15 years in prison. Edit. Thanks for the kind thoughts. My dad is no longer with us, due to complications from COVID, but I'm sure he would have found it entertaining to hear that so many people liked his story. I can remember seeing his stitched-up stomach. The surgeons opened his belly up from the sternum down to his waist. It was super gnarly. To answer some questions to my knowledge, they never found the accomplice who handed him the gun. I agree that he deserved more time. I think the max sentence for a first-degree attempted murder charge is 20 years. He may have gotten a shorter sentence because he was a first-time offender. I'm not exactly sure on that. Story 7. I had a friend who got into his car drunk with 5 other people, flipped the car and killed one of the passengers. He went from being this charming, good-looking, likable guy to a shut-in and was seen as a monster to a lot of people in the community. He ended up committing suicide about a year after the accident. He was seriously broken about what had happened. Story 8. Kid I went to high school with wasn't going to graduate and decided to protest by speeding and doing wheelies on the road in front of the school. On his 3rd round, he passes a pickup truck, hooks his leg on the bumper and is thrown from the bike right on his head, snapping his neck. School posthumously graduated him. Edited to help clear up questions. Happened in 1995 on the northern Illinois-southern Wisconsin border. I noticed his intelligence has been questioned. Let me share an additional anecdote. His nickname was Bob. When asked what it was backwards, he replied without guile or irony that it was OOB. Whether you agree with the school's action in graduating him or not, locally it was considered window dressing as the whole town knew of what happened within hours of his accident. Story 9 guy I went to high school with was kicked out of his college ROTC and moved back home. After some time of living at home, his dad walked into his bedroom and went off about him being a lazy and needing to do something with his life. He decided he was going to take his gun and rob a bank. Supposedly the gun wasn't loaded. But he did successfully rob the bank and get away. Some time went by, he moved out of his parents' house and started living it up. He eventually told someone he trusted. That person turned him in. He was arrested and charged. He got a count for every person who was in the bank because he had a gun. You can decide if he ruined his life when he decided to rob the bank or when he decided to tell someone that he did it. Story 10 the man that killed my grandfather had never so much as had a speeding ticket. He was married with kids and fell behind on rent. My grandfather that was in his 80s worked for the company that rented this guy his home for extra money. Grandpa couldn't reach him about his rent, so went and did a welfare check. The guy panicked and murdered my grandfather. Destroyed more than one life in a matter of 30 seconds. Story 11 pretty successful woman at a company I worked got drunk, took an Uber home from a party, realized she left the keys to her apartment behind, so she decided to climb up to her second-story balcony to get her spare set. She slipped, paralyzed herself, couldn't work for a year, racked up ridiculous medical debt, and the pandemic left her position useless, so she was let go. Story 12 my father punched a window out of anger, severed the artery and ligament in his bicep, almost bled out, effectively removed his ability to work with his hands, which was the one thing he had going for him. He then became a moody POS alcoholic. Actually, he always was one, but way worse after this. He then beat the neighbor across the road with a pipe after they got drunk and got into an argument. He was arrested and went to jail. My parents lost the family home. They ended up splitting. I went no contact with him. 2 years later he took his life. Story 13 my former roommate had a great job, made great money, had his own house in which I rented a room. The only problem was he was a serious alcoholic and a shitty person. He'd get up at 4:30 to go to work, get off at 2, and then hit the bar until 11, every single night. Unless he had a girl coming over, then he'd come home at 10, do a quick cleanup of his filthy room and have obnoxious and very inconsiderate loud. He hit a guy who was riding his bike drunk driving his way home one night, fled the scene, came home, and went to the neighbor's house and said he hit a pole. The neighbor called the police, and on the way to the house, they found the guy he hit with his front bumper next to the body. He went to jail for vehicular homicide, did 6 months and got out. Now he lives with his parents and can't get a job because his story is a little infamous in our town. His sister took over his mortgage and lives in his house now. All he does all day is cry on Facebook about how life isn't fair and badmouths the guy he killed. Story 14 third-hand story from a former coworker. One of the other Marines at the base where he was stationed in the 90s stole plastic explosives from the test range and tried to sell them at a bar that was literally line of sight from the base. The first person to show any interest was an NCIS officer. That guy might still be in Leavenworth. Story 15 a guy I went to high school with was playing bottle rocket tag with some friends and took one to the eye which blinded him. He was a senior ready to go to college on a baseball pitching scholarship. Story 16 that Aussie kid who, on a dare, ate a slug that had a parasite, developed a gnarly brain infection, ended up in a coma for a year, woke up paralyzed, then passed away in 2018. He was only 19 when it happened. Story 17 security company. This happened before I worked there, but some co-workers told me the story guy was doing well at his job, got lots of promotions, on his way to lieutenant, but was too into his job and got a police scanner that he would listen to. One day just as he was getting off work a high-speed chase went by. He hoped in his personal vehicle with his firearm, got to the front of the chase, blocked the suspect in and pulled his gun. Suddenly the cops were much more interested in the crazy guy with a gun, got hit with several felony charges. Story 18 some guy tried to come into my nightclub when he was clearly too drunk. I made the call to not let him in, so he starts shouting at me and tries to aggressively walk up to me. I put my hands up in defense and he's pushing back against me. Then the dude lunged at my boss next to me, so my boss shoves him. The guy tumbles backwards and slams the back of his head on a curb, paralyzed from the neck down forever. Tried to take my boss to court for $15 million, but the camera showed this guy instigating everything. Story 19 he was gonna be the one to put our dinky little private school on the map by going to the NFL as a kicker. He fell off a picnic table that was being pulled behind a pickup truck at a party. Pasture surfing. By the time I saw him again a year later, he could almost feed himself without assistance. Story 28 kid I went to high school with didn't look both ways when he was crossing the street on his skateboard. A motorcyclist hit and killed him. The motorcyclist was hospitalized and lived. Story 21 the 17-year-old girl that was driving 105 miles per hour down a dark desert road at 6:35 a.m. Next week will have been 3 years since it happened. She hit me, head on, and that was it for her. I drive past her memorial on the side of the road every day. And I think about how someone with so much ahead of them could lose everything due to one bad decision. I lost my teeth that day, but she lost a whole lot more. I hope her family is doing well. This is probably a tough time for them. Story 22 kid in middle school was walking home with headphones in. Stopped to wait for a train to pass, but was unfortunately standing on another train's tracks as he waited. Story 23 local police chief did a hit and run over the weekend on a parked unattended vehicle, in his department vehicle. By the end of the day Tuesday he was resigning. State police investigated and issued a bunch of summary offense citations. DUI was not among the charges. No one was hurt and the guy resigned. But, you know, there's only one reason you drive away from hitting something after midnight. Story 24. A neighbor, his wife and his friend's wife were at the neighbor's house. The two men both got into arguments with their wives and decided to go out drinking down the street. A few hours later I'm woken up by my sister banging on my bedroom door. I was staying with them at the time because a car crashed doing probably 80 in a 25 miles per hour right next to our home. I jumped out of bed and got outside to see the neighbor's car crashed into a tree and two men trapped inside. The tree the car hit stopped them from ramming into another neighbor's house, and they hit it so hard. The battery was in the street after hours. Their car caught fire and we had to watch them burn to death. Still see it and smell it every now and then when trying to sleep. I had never met the wife, so I had no idea who she was when she came up and asked me what happened. So I said some guy crashed his car. She took off running after she recognized the car. Can't believe I told her that her husband died so bluntly. Story 25. A guy I know robbed a bank with a note saying something along the lines of "put the money in the bag," was released on bond within a few weeks, went back to the same bank with another note, and robbed it again. I think he got 35 years, multiple instances comprised of multiple minutes each, but yeah. Story 26. My ex sent child pornography to himself via email and the company immediately reported it to the police. He was arrested a couple weeks later and is now serving a 7-year prison sentence with lifetime registration. Edit y'all, this thread has shown me that I'm still traumatized AF. What a thing to happen to someone. Of course it happened to me. I am so sorry to all the wonderful partners who have been lied to and cheated on. We try our best, we build a good life for the two of you, and they take it all away. I hope you are all doing good now, and if it's fresh, believe me, it is going to get better. Love yourself. Evil preys on good. You are amazing and deserving of love. Story 27. Childhood friend thought his wife was cheating on him with one of her coworkers, so he goes to the guy's house, waits for him to get off work, and jumps him with a metal bar thing, left him laying with permanent brain damage, drove down to some old abandoned buildings by the docks and ended it. They had a kid and another on the way. She wasn't cheating on him, dude had major insecurities. Story 28. Army Staff Sergeant E6 was on track to be the next probably Sergeant Major. Great guy, can lead troops, smart, motivated others, all in all a great soldier. We came back from Iraq and that weekend he DUIs into a tree, horrifically maiming the soldier in the passenger seat. Kid lost an eye and use of most his face and mouth. I didn't stay in long enough to see the outcome but doubt he recovered. Story 29. This one I say with a heavy heart. Best friend was testing his bike about 200 m from his house after service and fixing a few parts. Wasn't speeding at all but had to swerve to avoid a mother and baby in the pram as they crossed onto the footpath bridge he was on. Essentially it's a blind corner leading onto the bridge, so cannot see who's coming until they actual step foot. He slid off the bike to avoid the pair of them and hit his head on a pole. Wasn't wearing a helmet or speeding, was simply testing the bike at probably 50 km/h. His skull fractured, basically brain ruptured, and I was stuck with him groaning in pain, eyes flickering uncontrollably with my shirt pushing into his brain which felt somewhat like mashed potato. Waited for about 30 minutes before an ambulance arrived. Ambulance realized they couldn't help so had to call in a helicopter. Was in a coma with severe head trauma for 2 weeks and died from pneumonia. Last words I ever said to him when he was completely conscious was, "Wear your helmet." He said he'll be back in a minute or two. RIP. Edit. I understand 50 km/h can be speeding, I should say. He wasn't hooning or riding extremely irrational as some people do on dirt bikes. He wouldn't have even left second gear. I was standing directly down the road, heard him brake as he approached the bridge, didn't even see the woman until he was off the bike. Story 30. He picked a fight in basic training. Stupid pecking order, alpha male bullshit. Got his head slammed into the corner of a wall locker, which broke through his temple. Think he was in the hospital for 3 or 4 months. Not sure how disabled he ended up being. Don't fight for your pride, guys. Be friendly, humble, and scarily accurate at the range. Story 31. There's a guy I went to school with, super smart, full ride to a good college out of state. We were seniors at the time, so 2019-ish, we had a guy come in and give us a presentation on WW2 stuff, including some guns that had the firing pins taken out. Dude took a picture of one as it was being passed around and posted it on Snapchat with a caption, "Don't come to school tomorrow." He got suspended, lost his scholarship, and we never really heard from him again. He's still alive as far as I know, but he's keeping his head down. Story 32. Guy I went to high school was at a bar. Spoke to a girl at the bar. She said she had a boyfriend. He said okay and left it alone. Boyfriend was not impressed. Waited for him to go out for a smoke and sucker punched him. Fell, hit his head and died. So pointless. Story 33. I work in a mall, and someone tried to steal from the Lululemon store across the way. She got caught, panicked, and for some reason pulled the fire alarm on her way out of the store, which I'm pretty sure is a felony where I live. All happened in like 5 minutes, and she was taken away in cuffs. Story 34. My dad was an addict. He would take his various combination of pills and fall asleep, wake up and forgot he took them, and then take them all again. One day he didn't wake back up. Story 35. A guy I used to work with tried to rob a bank in blackface to make police look for a black man. Good thing his efforts were terrible. This was maybe 15-ish years ago, so I don't know if he's out of prison now or what. Edit. Okay, so I worked with him 15-ish years ago, but the incident happened 2017 article. Story 36. I was a high school teacher in a bad area. I had two brothers, one was 1 year older than the other in my classes. They went tagging one night with their crew, tagged on an old lattice trash can. She came out and yelled at them. One of the kids they were with had a gun and shot her, dead. All the boys are spending a life sentence in prison. Story 37. My dear friend and ex, who I met back in high school, worked for the Conservation Corps and loved it. He had such a passion for the natural environment and had recently been accepted into university to pursue a degree related to environmental sciences in the fall. One day in May of 2023 he was out in the field on a four-wheeler, doing his job, and he was traversing an incline. He somehow lost control and the four-wheeler flipped and crushed him. He was 26. I remember him fondly and often, and I hope he didn't suffer. Story 38. Nephew was driving a borrowed truck when he and a buddy picked up a friend. Then the buddy shot the friend twice in the head and killed him. Then they dumped the body, returned the truck with blood and bullet holes and went home. Next day went back to clean up the truck and were both arrested for murder. My nephew pleaded guilty to a lesser charge and testified against the shooter, did a few years in prison, got out, and is no longer welcome anywhere. He's not able to leave South Dakota due to the felony conviction and nobody in our family has any interest in helping him out, so he's stuck there where everyone knows him as a murderer. Story 39. Guy I knew had it all looking up, married his work colleague, had a kid together, bought a small house, but he just made the stupidest decisions when he got drunk, has an argument with his wife, storms out and decides to drown his sorrows. Misses the last bus home and instead of walking or getting a taxi decides to try sleeping in a park known for homeless drug users. Ends up spilling his heart out and how hell do anything to numb the pain. They offer him heroin, he takes it. 3 days later his family are panicking. They can see he's withdrawing money but can't find him. Eventually find him passed out in some alleyway. Mom books him into rehab out of her own pocket. Lose his job, his wife, his kid, his house, all because he didn't want to face his wife after an argument. He's cobbled together a life now, but you can't help but think what could have been for better or worse. Story 40. Former roommate of mine was a sergeant on a suburban police unit. Got busted viewing on the unit's computers Britney Spears pics and was fired. Couldn't get any other job except security. Story 41. He gave his drug supplier photocopies of cash instead of real cash. He thought they wouldn't notice. They beat him so bad he got brain damage and can't walk. Don't with the cartel. Story 42. My brother. He had 5 kids and a wife and some rage issues. About 25 years ago he was at his son's soccer game and one of the other dads struck up a conversation about soccer with my brother's wife. My brother lost his mind. He punched that guy, grabbed his wife by the hair and dragged her to his truck. Several witnesses testified about this later. Once they were home he entered the kitchen, shoved his wife up against the fridge, and strangled her to death. The kids testified to this. He then loaded the kids into his truck, grabbed his rifle, and headed toward the city where his plan was to kill me, our father, his kids, and then himself, to spare them all from the shame. Thankfully he had threatened this many times to many people. Traffic was that day, and he was intercepted by police. He served 20 years of his sentence. I testified twice at his parole hearings trying to prevent him from getting out because I knew what he was and always would be. He was eventually released but died 2 days later in a car accident. Story 43. Kid I worked with. He went out in our local city, got drunk, got in a fight, punched the guy fell, smacked his head off the curb and died. 14 years in prison. Edit. I just googled the case. I made a mistake. He was charged with and convicted of culpable homicide and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Story 44. A chick I knew threw everything away: husband, kids, job, friends, all 'cause she wanted to be high as all the time. It happened seemingly overnight. She emptied out her husband's bank account then just off. The last we heard she odd and died a few years ago. Our heads are still spinning wondering why. Story 45. I had a coworker who was looking down at their cell phone and stepped off a curb, under the rear wheels of a delivery truck making a right. That was that. Very tragic. Story 46. Guess I know a lot of these. A friend was taking a nap with his newborn on a waterbed and rolled over the baby. The baby didn't make it and he's never been the same. Story 47. My peewee football coach. He was beating his wife and his neighbor came over and they got into an altercation. Coach got bloodied up a bit in the scuffle and neighbor went home with the coach's wife and kids. Coach went back inside, got his gun, went over to the neighbor's front door and shot and killed his neighbor. Coach tried to plead self-defense but his blood trail showed he went inside, got his gun, went back outside and back to the neighbor's house. Boom, premeditated murder. Story 48. A friend's son leaned back in his chair. Chair slipped, looked like he was going to be a quadriplegic but he had breathing issues and died 2 weeks later. He was 18. Story 49. I'm going to go the other direction with this. Just because I've read so many depressing DUI stories. My bio father got his second DUI T-boning someone in an intersection. His wife told him this was it. If he got in any more trouble she wasn't going to bail him out. Well, a few weeks later he missed his court date for some reason or another. It was not because he was using drunk but still no excuse. Gets picked up on a bench warrant for the initial charge. Wife gets the call. Here's the charge, says him. Let him rot thinking it's a third DUI. Takes a week for word to get to his sponsor that he's in jail again. Sponsor goes to talk to him, realizes it's not a new DUI and fills in his wife who goes and gets him all sorry. He's totally okay with it because of the circumstances. Also this means he knows she really means business. Second DUI so no diversion programs allowed. Does his time. This is also when I finally tracked him down. His wife told me he was off painting fences the next town over and would be back next month. I'm a sheltered kid and I believed it LMAO. Actually made it stick and stayed clean and sober. I went down to meet him a year later and he brought me to his AA meeting all proud that he was getting his 1-year chip. Fast forward a decade and change, not only does he still have that 1-year chip and many more, but he's got his foster certification and he's taking on high-risk boys for foster care that need a sponsor and help fighting addiction. Story 50. After most of the guests had left our home at the end of my son's second birthday, we heard a loud crash outside. A guy driving down our street was upside down. His front-wheel drive vehicle made contact with a tire of a parked car and the rubber-on-rubber flipped his car. I rushed out barefooted, saw empty beer cans thrown from his car and cut my legs in the glass trying to check the guy out. Turns out he didn't have a seatbelt on. During the flip, he was partially ejected through the sunroof and when the car came down, his head was the main point of contact between the ground and the main support between the windshield and the sunroof. I could hear agonal breathing, got my sister-in-law to call the ambulance, and since a considerable amount of weight of the car was still pinning his head against the ground, I decided to go against the normal advice of not moving people, organized a bunch of bystanders to lift the car off his head and slid him out while keeping his neck as still as possible. He continued to have agonal breathing, ambulance secured him and drove him off. Doubt he survived, but didn't have enough info to check. I don't know if I should have just left the car pressing on his head, but from the nonchalant way the ambulance and fire department responded, only a raised eyebrow when I explained my rationale. It either was the right call, was a forgivable mistake, or they could tell it wouldn't have mattered in the end. Because the glass cut me, and I got his blood, and based on the lumpiness of what came out of his ears, some brain matter on me, I ended up having to take meds to decrease my chances of getting HIV since I didn't know his status, which made me feel like I had the flu for weeks. All that to say, wear your seatbelts, kids. You could die even going 20 miles per hour if you get unlucky enough. Also, if you don't have pants and shoes on, maybe just give instructions instead of touching bleeding people. Lessons learned. Story 51. I've told this story before, but here it is. Was at a brewery with a buddy. We were regulars there and know the owners. A group of guys come in, and one of them gets absolutely faced. Pretty sure he was doing coke as well. He was looking like he was about to fall down, so I invited him to take a seat at our booth. We talk for a bit. I ask him what sort of hobbies he has, things he likes to do. He says video games. I reply that I love video games too, I'm a game designer. He then stands up and says, "You confused?" I just stared at him and said, "What?" He says this guy is making fun of me. Me and my buddy explain that I'm a game developer and I was not at all making fun of him. I say I can't tell if you're being serious or just with me. He then slaps me hard across the face. He says, "Can you tell now?" I'm flabbergasted. Can't believe what just happened. I say, "You can't just slap people, that's not okay, dude." The bartender is a friend and saw the whole thing. Lucky he's a bigger guy, which I am not, and immediately grabs the guy and kicks him out. Hey, race the kicker though, this was a work outing for him. Not only that, but I found out later my brother worked at the same place. I hear from him that he not only got fired but his fiancée left him too. I guess she was at the bar. Story 52. For some reason that I cannot begin to comprehend, the school bus driver in our small village used to let two brothers out on one side of the railroad tracks, even though they lived on the other side of the railroad tracks. The older brother, 16, liked the thrill of beating the train by running across the tracks if a train was coming. You could hear the train, as it would blow its horn coming into the village, but not see the train until you were right up on the tracks due to village buildings' proximity to the tracks. One day as he sprinted across, there was a second train coming from the opposite direction on a second set of tracks. So the younger brother, and all the remaining students on the bus, watched as not one, but two trains obliterated this young man. Edited for clarity. Story 53. My father solicited who he thought was a child online. It was a sting, thank goodness. At the time, he was a software engineer who worked for a defense contractor. Needless to say, he was immediately fired. Mom divorced him and got primary custody of my brother and me. He spent the last dozen or so of his short, miserable life designing library software. Story 54. Guy I know found a drunk, unconscious girl at a party, raped her and got caught, doing prison time, and when he gets out everybody knows, so he probably won't go back to town. Story 55. My daughter was brainwashed by her mother to hate every aspect of me. She claimed SA and I was arrested. I submitted surveillance of my house on the supposed day it was supposed to happen. After daughter committed suicide for being an outcast. Text to her mother confirmed that she did it because I had full custody of her brother. My daughter was 9, I miss her so much. The mother was ordered anger management. I am and forever will be broken. For clarity, my ex-wife orchestrated the entire thing with my daughter. Story 56. Had a friend who was 2 months away from a medical release from the military, was nicely set up and wouldn't have to work another day in his life. Decided to get caught distributing drugs. Military discharged him, no medical pension, and he's now in jail. Maybe not destroying his life in a matter of minutes, but definitely ruined the rest of his life with a few bad decisions in a row. Story 57. Didn't know him personally, but John Edward Jones, literally crawled to his grave. Dude had a wife and a newborn child. Why? More context. Cave explorer. Took a wrong turn in an unexplored part of Nutty Putty. Went in head first in a dead end. Got stuck forever. Story 58. When I was a senior in high school they had a weird thing where you had to show up to the school to get your diploma. They also gave out the yearbooks too, so that was okay. I told my buddy we were all going cruising and he really should tag along. find a party or some girls. He told me he didn't have any money and his mom was going to pick him up at the gas station that was 3 miles away. He wanted to run there instead of us giving him a ride. I tried to get him to come with us, really tried, he wouldn't budge. Found out some kid was drinking after he got the diploma, I guess a lot. He was driving afterwards, swerved off the side of the road and hit some kid that should not have been running to a gas station. He should have been being a kid in the backseat of a car on the last day we were still technically in high school. He should have been with me. That was a heavy casket to carry. He raised homing pigeons and at his grave they let them loose. It was beautiful. I sure miss you, David. Wish you came with me that night. Story 59. A guy I know that I was friends with in elementary school is currently in jail for murder. In hindsight, the psychology of it all kind of makes sense. His mom didn't want him and moved across the country to party and not be responsible for him. I don't even know the situation with his dad. He ended up living with his grandparents who held him accountable for absolutely nothing but tried to seem like hardasses. He ended up joining a gang near the end of high school, and as an initiation thing he and a couple other new guys had to take a guy that was leaving the gang out into the boonies and kill him. The worst part is that they didn't even end up killing the guy, they just basically knocked out the guy real hard and then left. He ended up getting torn apart and eaten by animals, and someone in the area saw what the animals were eating and called it in.